Women and minorities have entered into the workforce in a big way. Just to mention a few statistics, currently about 47% of our US workforce is female, 60% of 16-year-old females are working, 62% of African American females are working, and 56% of Latinas are working. And while women have entered into all different kinds of occupations, society, both men and women, still hold a lot of more traditional ideas about what a woman should do, like what kinds of jobs women should have. So in many cases, women in particular positions are viewed pretty negatively and disrespected. So what a lot of these women entering the workforce have been doing is starting small, home-based businesses. They've been doing this at a much faster rate than men in order to more easily balance work and home demands. That's one big appeal of these kinds of entrepreneurial positions. But of course, women have entered all kinds of occupations, and female professionals in corporate jobs oftentimes are entering into a hostile environment, a hostile work environment. These are the kinds of environments that support more masculine values, like competition and just, giving each other a hard time, making each other's life more difficult. This tends to push women away. They don't typically prefer these like super competitive environments we've generally seen. So these hostile work environments, they also tend to alienate a lot of women and just, lead to things like burnout as well. But one of the ways that this kind of hostility manifests is through gender discrimination. Discrimination, just in broad speaking, discrimination is when you deny a job or promotion to somebody solely based on some feature. So with gender discrimination, that feature is, gender. So if you deny a job or a promotion to somebody because they are a male or a female, that's discrimination, gender discrimination. And there's 3 common ways that gender discrimination manifests. We see typically women working the same position as men. They have higher expectations for their performance. So women have to work harder in that same position. That's common. We see that in a lot of different occupations. Another thing that we see in a lot of occupations is women typically have difficulty. It takes them longer to get advancement in their career. I'm sure you've heard of the concept of the glass ceiling. This refers to a level to which women may rise in a particular organization, but cannot go beyond. Where, men could go beyond that glass ceiling. It's just women are capped. They're prevented from reaching the highest positions in a lot of companies. But there's another way that this career advancement difficulty manifests, and that's through the glass cliff. I don't know if you've ever heard of this one. This one's less commonly talked about. It's a situation in which a company that is doing poorly will purposefully advance a woman to top position. Now, why exactly they do this, the reasoning for doing this, there could be any number of reasons why they might say it, but it really looks from the outside like this company that's already like a sinking ship. They're putting the woman in the top position just so they have like a scapegoat, basically. That's what it often looks like from the outside. Now, besides women having to work harder at the same position, and besides having more difficulty just advancing in their career, another way that gender discrimination manifests is in pay, on salaries and whatnot. Typically, women are paid on average 80% of what men are paid for the same work. And we see this all over the place. If you want to hear more about this, I know that there is some, controversy about this particular statistic, but this information comes from like governmental like census kind of data. I don't remember the exact source, but this is like the most official of official data collection. So this seems to be pretty legitimate data, at least, if you trust the government, I guess. Besides discrimination, we also see a lot of sexual harassment in these hostile work environments. So this is completely different. A lot of people confuse discrimination and harassment. They're completely different things. So discrimination is just when your job is made more difficult in some way. Harassment is when some kind of unwanted sexual interaction occurs. And typically, we do see this. It's pretty unfortunate how common this is. Women in the workplace report being harassed about 28-ish% of women report this, and close to about 58% of women report feeling like they could be harassed, like they feel uncomfortable at work. They feel like it could happen at any moment. So most women do at least feel uncomfortable in this regard. But most of the women who are harassed, we never hear from them. It's kind of hard to know exactly how big of a problem it is because a lot of the times it's just not talked about. The victims of sexual harassment are quite often the people who are perceived to be the most vulnerable. Younger employees, new employees, if they're single or recently divorced, people who just don't have a lot of social support and don't have a lot of, organizational support. So like interns, for example. So these are the ones that are targeted by, harassers. And if the individual is harassed, then it's not only going to negatively affect them if they allow it to continue, it'll also negatively affect them if they don't allow it to continue. So this is the real terrible thing about sexual harassment is even if the person speaks up or not, it's still going to have a profoundly negative impact on their career, on their self, on their emotions, on their home life. Like sexual harassment is a serious thing that can have a profound impact. But I should mention something, and that is it's oftentimes we talk about it in terms of how it affects women because women are typically the victims. But 16% of the legally the formal charges when it comes to sexual harassment cases involve the harassment of men. So once again, we don't know exactly how common this affects men because a lot of times people just don't talk about it, but 16% of the formal charges are for male victims. So gender discrimination and harassment are obviously pretty common things, and it's really sad to talk about it. But it is a very important issue that we all need to be very aware of. I'm sure you've heard of the Me Too movement, and a lot of people have been very critical about it, but a lot of what these people are talking about is completely common. It's totally normal, and that's just really kind of depressing if you think about it. So let's move on. Besides gender issues, there's also age issues. Age discrimination is actually pretty common as well. So this refers to denying a job or promotion to somebody solely on the basis of their age. Now, obviously, this is not going to be legally allowed. U.S. federal law prohibits this practice for workers over the age of 40. But nonetheless, companies will find ways to incentivize their aging employees to quit early. They'll give them like bonuses if they quit early, or they might go the other way and actually punish them for sticking around by just kind of making them increasingly more and more uncomfortable until they just decide they don't want to put up with this stuff anymore. So that is something that has been happening for quite a long time. But due to changes in our economics due to changes in how a lot of companies do their business, we are seeing a emerging model called Boomerang Employees. This is where individuals who have terminated their employment at one point in time will actually be invited to return back to work at the same organization in a future time period. So for a lot of companies, this makes perfect sense. Like if you're doing a lot of more like white collar stuff that requires a lot of skills and training and experience, it would be great to have somebody who has all that knowledge that they can share with the younger employees. So bringing them back, pulling them back out of retirement and having them, collaborate with younger employees is a great idea. And a lot of companies are starting to do that. But a lot of individuals, as they go throughout their career, they're going to get to a point where they are kind of pushed away because they just don't really have what they need to keep going. Either they've become dissatisfied with their job, or their skills have become obsolete due to technological advancement, or economic trends have just made their job redundant or something like that. People are kind of pushed away from their jobs. And a lot of people who don't leave these, stagnating jobs will experience something we call career plateauing. And this will occur just basically when there's no opportunity for advancement, or the person is just, for whatever reason, not interested in advancement. So for individuals who have these kinds of experiences where they just kind of feel stuck and they feel uncomfortable and their employer isn't really happy about the situation, for a lot of these individuals, the best course of action is to get some kind of retraining. The retraining of mid-career and older workers is a great way to get them out of this kind of stagnation. Lifelong learning is very important for employees. At my job as an instructor, we do this kind of stuff every semester where the college will offer various courses that we can use to improve our skills and knowledge. But unfortunately, for a lot of jobs, they don't have those kinds of luxuries. They can't help their employees get back into the groove, so to speak. So they might just be let go. Occupational insecurity is a common issue for a lot of people nowadays because of all these, major changes in our economics. People have lost their jobs in pretty record numbers. And how people cope with job loss will pretty accurately predict their ability to, recover from it. So some people focus more so on combating those negative emotions that result from loss. We call this emotion-focused coping, where they just basically try to make themselves feel better. They just consume themselves with trying to feel better about this job loss. And this will oftentimes drive people to do things that are pretty irresponsible, like drug abuse or, some other kind of escapism. In the end, this often results in even greater stress because they're not solving any real problem. It's definitely not going to fix anything by retreating from the problem. So what people who are generally much more successful tend to do is when they lose their job, when they get fired, they have to deal with the emotions, but what they focus on is the problem itself. So we call this problem-focused coping, where they just try to figure out what went wrong, how to fix it, and how to avoid doing that again in the future. So recognizing what that problem is and trying to fix it in some way. And whether you're able to do this kind of problem-focused coping or not, like I mentioned, you are going to typically have some unhappiness. You're going to be pretty miserable in most cases. Because unemployment, just being unemployed, is going to have a negative effect on most individuals. Whether you've recently been fired or you've never had a job, people who are unemployed typically see a decline in their physical and mental health and self-esteem. So if you have lost a job or you're having trouble getting into one, just here's a few recommendations from the research. Approach this lack of job with a healthy sense of urgency. You know, even if you're very low on funding, it's probably the case that you don't have to get a job today. You should try to plan for the future. You should try to just take your time and make sure you make a good choice. The next recommendation is consider your next career move and what must be done to achieve it. Try to have the entire map in your head. Where are you now? Where do you want to get to, and what are the steps to get there? So you try to figure out what those steps are and plan accordingly. The third recommendation from the research is you need to admit and react to any changes in your life as soon as you recognize it. So, as I was mentioning with that problem-focused coping, if you got fired for some particular reason, you need to figure out what that is. You need to be honest with yourself and try to correct it as quickly as you can. The fourth recommendation is be cautious of temporary employment. Temporary employment might sound appealing because you can get a nice big paycheck in a relatively short period of time. But that time you're spending on this temp job is not time that you're using to try to get into your career and advance up that career ladder. So at best, it's going to be a distraction, and at worst, it could completely derail you in terms of your ultimate goal of a career. And then the fifth and final piece of advice from the research is you need to try to be realistic. Identify a realistic goal and then try to list the steps that you can actually achieve in order to achieve that goal. So just try to, think about what you can actually do with the skills you have and how to maybe, improve your skills in order to get to that, obtainable goal. So you need to be realistic.